some stories about your incredible career?
Yeah. Yep.
Specifically, 1969 Grand Slam that Pete Sampras told me nobody will ever do again.
Yeah. Unfortunately, you know, Pete didn't pull it off, which I thought he would have if it was possible. But yeah, you need to be consistent and lucky the whole four tournaments.
Yeah. We'll start early on. When did you fall in love with tennis?
My family played, tennis. My mother probably played a little bit more than my dad. Two elder brothers, a younger sister, and so, there was not much else to do. You could play tennis or play cricket, and yeah, I played a fair bit of cricket as well. But I think the tennis took over because I had a good coach, I think, in Rockhampton, a fellow called Charlie Hollis, and he was instrumental in starting me off right. I think stroke production was important, and so that was how I started off at about 9, and then played small tournaments all around central Queensland.
And then can you talk a little bit about Charlie Hollis and his 3 things that he that I read stayed with you your whole career? What was his mantra?
I think he's changed a lot, but the one thing that he said, I was a left-hander, and he says, left-handers, you'll never win Wimbledon or any of the big tournaments with a chip backhand. You've got to be able to hit topspin on that side. And so, at a young age, I was 13, 14, 15, hitting him into the cheap seats often. And so, that was one of the reasons that he said, when I look back, that was probably one of the most important things that he said. But, just going out, compete, don't let the guy, take advantage of you. If you're leading 6-1, 6-1, take the next set 6-1 as well. And so that I think is a good way to approach the game.
Great. Can you talk to me about Charlie's philosophy of, I think I read it in an article you said, and you can start it off, Charlie always believed in 3 things: heart, brains, and a never say die attitude.
Yeah, I think, Charlie, his heart's, brains, and attitude, determination. And I think that was always something on his mind when he watched me at a younger age. And I went by it because, I loved the game and wanted to compete. And so this was something that I, grew up believing in. Yeah, no, Charlie Hollis was hearts, brains, and never say die attitude when you're on the court. And I think that stayed with me all my career. And I think that's one of the things that I put a lot of my wins down to, because I had trouble 2 sets to love down or 2 sets to 1, but being able to, stay with that match all the way through.
And talk about back in your day, who were your rivals, but also like on the court, but you guys were friends off the court.
Yeah, I think off the court, I think we're pretty close. We all relied on each other to help each other. Sometimes it's, if you're not playing very well, they'll say, well, let's go and work out a few times, and maybe you're doing something a little different. Maybe you're throwing ball toss is not high enough. But on the court, we're a vicious competitor. I think Roy Emerson, Fred Stolley, myself, Neale, Fraser, we're all out there competing. I idolized probably Lou Hode, who was just before my time, although I played and saw him play back in the 50s, late 50s and into the 60s. But that's how I learnt the game, just by watching someone like Lou and Ken Rosewall. Frank Sagerman, of course, was very, very instrumental in my career as well.
Great. And then talk to me, one of the favorite stories was your wedding day. And how, what a show of, you guys were such competitors off the court, but tell me about your wedding day when you walked out of the church and all your rivals They got their rackets, and you guys walked under the arch. As just a sign of like respect, and I mean, you could say sportsmanship, but like, I mean, that's.
Oh yeah, no, it was a sort of, our marriage was a little bit strange in many ways because I was still on the tour and I couldn't get off the tour, and fortunately, my wife agreed with me that we'd do it up in Peacock Gap in San Rafael, and I, was there, and I think the Hode and Jimeno, Buckholz, McKay, Davies, were all there, and after the wedding, after the church wedding, they found all the Dunlop rackets that I had and everybody else had, and they put them up in a shape so that we could walk underneath it, and that was a sign, certainly a sign of respect, for myself and for Mary, and so yes, that was a great feeling, and I think it was more for Mary to be so pleased that everybody were there, respecting the fact that we were getting married. Yeah, I know the love of my life. I think Mary helped me in many areas when we competed, growing up, getting experience from her knowledge of the world, and so I was, I feel very honored that she took me on as a husband.
And what was it like to share that day with everybody, professionally and personally, and family and friends, true to.
I'm not sure that we knew exactly what we all did, but I was thrilled that all the players were there, and yes, they were generally just all our tennis friends. They weren't Mary's friends, but she was very happy to do it this way.
Harry Hopman in the Australian code for the Davis Cup, and is discipline a word that you use?
Well, discipline is certainly a word for Harry Hopman because that's what he worked on. And if you're on the tennis court on a 2-1-1 workout, you spent an hour and a half or 2 hours on the court. He would say, he says, I want you to take two of the juniors off for a run for 3 or 4 mile. And I thought, well, I've just finished 2.5 hours of on court, but that you didn't just change his attitude. You didn't say, oh well, then you don't have to go. He says you will go, and you will enjoy it. And so that's Harry Hopman in many ways. He was a great Davis Cup captain. He sort of knew your game, but he also had a good feeling about what the other person would be doing to you. And I think that, always comes out when you see him playing. It seems, I don't know how, but Australia has come up with 10 or 15 great champions in it, like a 20 span that I was in. And so, you just know the discipline was one of the things that, got the individuals to the top. It could be Sedgman, Hode, Rosewall, Cooper, Anderson, Fraser. They're all, just hungry champions to play better tennis. And I think Hopman knew that, and so he pushed them. And so that discipline always came off for me on court.
What 5 Davis Cup winning teams? Why were you so successful, and what did that tournament mean to you?
No, I think when you've got players like Roy Emerson, myself, Neale, Fraser, were competing, I think our competition wasn't as tough because, you work hard for 2 or 3 weeks prior to the Davis Cup, and then when the tennis, is on, you give everything you've got. And so, I was proud of us winning 5 Davis Cups during my tenure there.
Do you have a favorite memory?
No, I was just happy to be able to compete. I have the sort of the memory of playing Barry McKay in the first Davis Cup match in the U.S. And so I did lose to him, but it was my first chance. And Hopman said that yes, maybe you were a little bit too young because I was maybe 20 or 21 that I was playing. They threw me in there, but I think he knew that that would be the experience you need for Davis Cup.
And then after that, what did you take from that and going on to show your success in the Davis Cup?
No, I think just Davis Cup is a unique situation where, you know, players of all nations get out there and compete. And, you know, when you go off as a team to challenge for the Davis Cup, which we did a couple of times, you know, you've got to play in Mexico in 6,000 and 7,000 feet, you know, altitude. You know, you've got to be able to have that confidence that you can pull this off.
Now, talk to me about, I mean, you won 2 Grand Slams, 1962, 1969. If you were writing your own story about achievement, what would be your theme of winning a Grand Slam?
No, I don't know as I have a theme that you go by. I played as hard as I could, you know, all the matches in 62. You know, I had, you know, a lot of opportunities to get through all the matches. I think France was my worst, you know, tournament when it came to how long it took me to win, because I had, I think Marty Mulligan had me down match point in the quarterfinals at the French Championship. And then I think in the final, you know, Roy Emerson had me two sets all and 3-love in the 5th set. So, you know, you have to be able to persevere and go with what you've got. And I just, you know, I played to enjoy it and to compete, and I didn't want to come off the court unless I was a winner.
Great. And what words would you use to describe those runs? Like, I mean, these values of obviously dedication, but your athleticism, your focus.
No, I think dedication pushed me through a lot of matches. When you're playing Davis Cup, you know, you're playing for your country, and then or you're playing for, you know, a chance to be a Grand Slam winner, you know, meaning winning the French. You know, I think I put everything on the line, and you know, unless you come off the court saying you left all you've got on the court, then, you know, then you're happy with yourself.
What about your focus? Do you have a story on focus?
Well, focus is certainly knowing who you're playing against and where you're playing, you know, what conditions you're going to be playing under. Maybe you can be looking at Forest Hills in 1969, playing Tony Roach in the final, and we're playing on a slippery grass court. They've just had a helicopter hovering over the court to try and dry it out, and so, you know, you've got a lot of those, you know, those situations of the focus has got to be on it's one game at a time. You don't just go in there thinking, you know, when I win the first set, then I'll do this, and if I win. That doesn't work that way. You have to play every point. And as it turned out, I lost the first set to Tony for about 9-7, I think. But then I was able to change into spikes, which was another, you know, asset for me, because I was always worrying whether on grass we're going to get rain. And, you know, most times the referee will allow you to wear spikes. And this is what happened at Forest Hills. And, you know, unfortunately, I don't think Tony had spikes, but I couldn't stand up. And I said I needed spikes. And they said, well, just go ahead. This is the last match we're playing here. And so, you know, it was a time to persevere. And, you know, when you've got spikes on, you've got to learn how to pick your feet up all the time. You can't slide. And so, you know, a lot of things go into being able to play it well with spikes.
So just take me through there. When you put the spikes on, what changed in that game or the rest of that match?
Well, now the changes are coming in that I'm able to get to every ball rather than sliding and slipping and not having a footing. Footing is the most thing in ground strokes. Getting to the net, volleying, being able to chase lobs down. So I was happy to put him on, and as it turned out, I became a winner.
Okay, so the 1962, the Grand Slam, the French Open seemed to be the big one with three straight 5-set matches.
I always had trouble, with the clay courts at the French Championships, and playing Marty Mulligan in the quarterfinals, I believe. I played, he had me down match point in the fourth round, and it was, you just have to be sure of yourself and just go with what you believe. And so I missed my first serve, got the second one in, and I figured that Martin Mulligan, he was going to go down my backhand line. Being a lefty, I think he figured that was a weaker shot, but that was my best shot. And so when I did get the backhand and hit it as hard as I could across the court and into the net, into the open court. So but those sort of things happen in a flash, but you do remember them. And then again, I was in the final and playing Roy Emerson and playing, it's a 5-setter. He's got me 2 sets to love, and I think 3 love in the 5th set. And it's being able to persevere and get yourself geared for the competition, and it's being on clay. And of course, Roy was a good clay court player, but I think it was just a matter of, was I going to try too hard or just play the game that you know? And I think that was the one that I think made me pretty confident that I could win some of these matches down the line.
Great. And when you did win the Grand Slam in '62, what was your feeling? What was when you completed it?
Well, it was against Roy Emerson again at Forest Hills, and I beat him in 4 sets this particular time. But it was a thrill to be able to go around, start off in January and end up the French, Wimbledon, and then the crowning moment being at Forest Hills. So I was excited that this came off in '62.
Great. And then if I give you just start and finish this sentence. 1969 was what to you?
1969 was a banner year for me. I remember leaving Los Angeles and going down to Brisbane for the Australian. And when I arrived down there, my wife called me up, Mary called me up and said that she was pregnant. And it was due on the 9th of September, which was the last day of the Grand Slam at Forest Hills. And so it was eager. I was thrilled that she was pregnant, and Rick came along 9 months later. But I felt pretty happy with the way I played it at 1969. I know that the Australian Championships were a little different. We had, again, unseasonably bad weather, and so we had the rain. It was on grass. Played Fred Stolle, I believe, in the 2nd round. I played Roy Emerson in the 3rd round, and I played Tony Roach in the 4th round. And the 4th round match against Tony, I think we played somewhere around 90 games, and that's because they didn't have tiebreakers back in those years. It was, I think one was 11-9, and the 4th set was 22-24. So it was, you had to compete and participate and be fit enough to make sure that you stayed in the match and not let a bad shot here or there. You had to be able to compete all the way through.
Can you talk a little more about that match, the Tony, and what drove you to win that? I mean, I remember reading 105 degrees. You had tea leaves in your hat to keep cool.
No, I didn't. No, I think it's the match. Against Tony was always we had trouble. Being a lefty, and he being a lefty. It was a tough to keep the ball, consistent. And I think that was where I was, I felt like I played a good part, of staying with that match. I know that, Tony's got a good serve, and he allowed me to, keep the match in play. And I think, when we had 2-1 break, we could stop for after the third set, which we did. And, that I think maybe gave me another chance to have a second wind, so to speak.
Great. So when you win Australia, then we're moving on to France. What do you remember about that 69 French Open?
In 69, all the matches I knew were going to be tough. And I played one against Dick Creeley, who was, I think he had me 2-0 or 2-1. And we ended up playing in rain for probably half the match. And in the end, we stopped at 2-all. And, I was happy because I think things weren't too good out there on the court, because the balls were getting soft and mushy. And of course they were getting hard to see because it's late at night. And so I, was able to, when we came back for the fifth set, Roy Emerson came out, with me and practiced with me for about half an hour to an hour, and which I was ready to play this match, play one set. But I think Dick Creeley, had still had some sleep in his eyes, so he wasn't quite as ready. So you work through it, and then getting to the final, I was, again, got Ken Rosewall with, as a competitor again in the final. So, you think, how am I going to play this man? Because he beat me last year, and I thought, well, the only thing I think I have is maybe I can hit the ball a little harder, a little more spin on it, and try and, don't let him work me. Let me work him over. And I think that probably worked for me the best, because, I played some of the best tennis, I've played on clay courts. So, those sort of things come along, and if you work hard, you concentrate. I think concentration is probably the most important part of the game when you really boil it down. Yes, you've got the heat of battle, but you don't want to lose your momentum of concentration.
Great. So now you've got 2 wins. Now we're moving on to Wimbledon.
Well, in 1962, I had a tough time with a fellow called Premjit Lal, an Indian player, and he was always, he's a good young player, but he had me down 2 sets and 3-love out on an outside court. But I think as you play matches, you've got to just keep plugging away. Don't just give up because you think I'm down 2 sets and 3-love. 3 more games and you're out of this tournament. And I thought, there's no way I'm going to lose this match. And I think that, got me through, got to 3-all, and then at 3-all I went through, went 6-3, 6-love, 6-love. And so, it's a tough time, in 1969, I had some tough matches with, Stan Smith. There were a lot of good players there. But I guess I remember the final the most, and that was against Ken Rosewall. In the final at Wimbledon against John Newcomb, I knew it was going to be a tough match. He knows how to play me. He's sort of a thinking man champion. And so I went out there, got away pretty easily in the first set, but then things changed. He started chipping the ball low to my forehand volley, which was, not a weak shot, but it was suspect, and you had to play safe. And that allowed him to get back into the match. He threw some high lobs up, which with a small-headed racket back in those years, you had to sometimes let the ball bounce. Otherwise, hitting it in the air, you had to make a few errors. So, that was a match that was sort of thinking all the way through the match. And I thought that to me, it was a great win for myself at that stage against a player of John's capabilities.
That's great. And then so when you won that, talk to me when you won Wimbledon, and now are you thinking Grand Slam again?
You know, all the matches that come up, it's an individual tournament, each one of them, and you have to just treat it as such. You know, you can be way ahead of yourself, thinking, "Oh, when I win Wimbledon, then I'll be over here at Wimbledon at the U.S. Open." I didn't feel that way. I didn't look that way into the match, but I did. I practiced and played, you know, on a lot of the times coming up to the final at Forest Hills, and so, you know, getting yourself ready to play in a championship like that, you have to be fit. You have to think about, is your fitness right? Is your racket and your strings and everything else, are you happy with how you're prepared to play? And I think that's half the battle when you're playing a match or an occasion like that. And so I was fortunate to have a coach, not a coach, but a good friend in John McDonald, who is not a Queenslander, but a New Zealander that plays Davis Cup. He was there, and he knew my game, and so when we were there together, you know, we practiced and worked on different shots, and so I think that as well as being able to go into an apartment, and you know, Charlton Heston was at this stage, had an apartment in Tudor City, and he says, "Why don't you use my place? Then the two of you can, you know, hide from the press if you need to. We can go out to the tennis and play your match and come back." And so I think that side of being ready for the match was a whole lot easier than in a hotel. And so, yeah, I thank Charlton Heston a lot for what he's done for me.
Well, you started that then. That's now all these guys, nobody stays at hotels anymore. They all stay in big houses.
Yeah.
So moving on to that, the U.S. Open to round up the Grand Slam.
Yeah.
Thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, there were some tough matches that I played. I think one of them was a four-setter with Arthur Ashe. It had to be stopped, you know, at 2-1, and so you have to work through it. Also, you know that the court's getting greasy, and you're having to slipping and sliding, and so, you know, come back the next day, and I was able to come through that against Arthur, and then I'm caught up again with Tony Roach in the final, and he had just beaten John Newcomb in the semifinal, and so now I've got Tony again, and you know, I didn't feel uncomfortable about playing him because I felt my game should hold up under his pressure, and you know, I think that was the one thing that, you know, did happen, that I was prepared to put every step in the right direction. You know, I did have spikes if I needed them because the court was wet and slippery, and so I, you know, went through the first set. I think it went 9-7, and even when it got to be, I think 7-all, I asked if I could put spikes on in the first set, and you know, Billy Talbot, who was the referee, he said, "Yeah, you go be my guest. This is the last match we're playing here," and so, you know, I put him on, but he still beat me in that particular set. But I was a lot easier, a lot more comfortable. I was able to move around a lot easier, a lot quicker, and I got to the net where Tony was having trouble. You know, he always was able to chip the ball in front of me, but I was ready then. I could prop, I could get forward because I had spikes on. And at times I felt like I was skidding in spikes. So the court wasn't very good to play on.
Those spikes are now in the Hall of Fame. So I mean, were they the key to that day, do you think, looking back?
Well, I think looking back, you know, certainly my tenacity to want to win the match helped, but I think the spikes themselves gave me the ability to move around and play the shots that I know that I can play.
And when you raise that trophy and now you have completed your second Grand Slam, I mean, what are your emotions or thoughts or?
You know, the emotions sometimes don't come out immediately, but you know, it was a thrill to, you know, get that trophy and be able to say, hey, I've won the Grand Slam for a second time. It's, you know, I was thrilled. I know that.
Well, you should be. Now, looking back, next year is 50 years since you've done that, and no one has done that since. What does that mean to you?
Yeah, it's amazing. It's 50 years the from the '69 Slam. You know, I certainly have talked about it a lot. I've enjoyed talking about it a lot. You know, it's something that you know, you feel, you know, in everything I've been doing, you know, in tennis, the Grand Slam comes up, and that I feel honored in many ways that, you know, the game is the way it is. That, you know, a Grand Slam was hard to do. I would have thought someone like Pete Sampras, and I would have thought there was a lot of players that would have come through. Andre Agassi, you know, there was a group of players that, you know, I thought you could come and win a Grand Slam, but, you know, you've got to put everything together, and you know, you can't make one mistake.
So, just was there more pressure to win in '69 because you had already won in '62?
Yeah, I don't think there's any more pressure. There's, yeah, pressure's pressure, and you put a lot of pressure on yourself if you're going to talk about it and tell them what you're going to think you're going to do. I went out there and competed just on every individual match, and yes, I figure there was maybe a little pressure the first time down to do something like that. There's only a fellow called Don Budge who did it in 1938, and so since then, 1962, yeah, there was pressure then, I think, but the pressure in '69, you know, wasn't the same sort of pressure. You know, I just knew that I'd already done it once, so that wasn't the criteria. You know, it was just that I, you know, was able to compete and play the best tennis, and I think I was playing better tennis, you know, because I had just turned professional in '63, and for 5 years I was out of the amateur world, and so open tennis, you know, came along in '68. But those 5 years as a pro, you know, with guys like Rosewall and Hode and Jimeno, Buchholz, McKay, all competing nightly, you know, you've got to improve or get off the tour. And so I think that was one of the best things that ever happened to me leading up to '68, and being able to play in the first Wimbledon, then play in the first French, and the British hardcourt in Bournemouth was the very first British open tournament. And so, you know, I was able to see all those things happen, and I think the '69 Slam, yes, everything's tough. No matter if you just win one tournament. I think I know you could be talking about Pete Sampras or anybody that says, you know, how many times were you nervous at Wimbledon in your career? Were you nervous? And of course, you know, what is the answer? Of course I was. But there's degrees of nervousness, and I think you just have to be able to control that nervous.
Does the 1969 define you as a player, do you think, the Grand Slam?
You know, I don't know whether it defines me as a player. Certainly, you know, I've got a record that maybe nobody's going to beat. And so I think that, yes, I am proud of my career, not only in '69 or everything leading up to '69. It's been, you know, it's going to be a great journey.
That's great. When you look back at your career, what do you see?
No, yeah, looking back at my career, yeah, I feel nothing but great things. You know, on the court, I had, you know, opportunities and took them. Had people to coach me and work with me, players to compete with, you know. But once you're off the court, now all of a sudden I mentioned, you know, Charlton Heston, but you know, there's so many people off the court that were they were encouraged, they were helped in many areas. You know, I have two brothers that were, you know, a little older than I was, and they probably instilled that effort to try and be a better player. And so there was a lot of people that I enjoyed, you know, contact.
How could you describe your playing style? Athletic, graceful? How would you describe it?
Yeah, I always, I always found myself wanting to be the person that hits the winner, not just putting the ball back till somebody missed. And I think that probably is my game. You know, I had a forehand that had a lot of topspin on it. In the end, I had a good backhand with topspin on it. I served okay, but I think my ability to get around the court was probably the best effort. That probably, when I look back at my serving and volleying and being able to anticipate an opponent.
What can you attribute winning 31 straight matches at Wimbledon to? 31.
Well, you better not lose. I felt good about Wimbledon. Every match I played at Wimbledon was one that I can almost tell you a little bit about it. And so I was honored that Wimbledon, was in my path when I grew up.
Winning a major requires talent, mental strength, practice, and even a little luck. What was your one thing, and do you have an example of one of those that?
Yeah, no, I guess there's always lots of little things. Luck comes into it at varying times, at important times. It might be you hit a let cord at an important point that breaks the other person's serve. I mean, if it doesn't hit the cord, maybe I don't win that point. So there's lots of things that goes into a tennis match, and you don't always look at it saying, this is I would have won that match if, or I could have lost that match if. And so I found that everything that I played with was part of my battle of experience and winning matches. Yeah, I turned pro in 1963 mainly because I came from amateur tennis. There was no money in the game, and so I found myself turning pro, playing against Hode, Rosewall, Gonzalez, Buchholz, McKay, Davies. Those 5 years as a pro put me in good position to play in the amateur tournaments. They put me in good position to play in the amateur, as a good position to put me in the open world against like the people that now is called the Grand Slam. And so this was my goal, was to play in all those tournaments. How well I do, you're not going to know until you play them. And so this was a thrill for me to compete another Grand Slam.
What does it mean for you to sit here and be a Hall of Famer, a member of the Hall of Fame?
Yeah, and I'm really honored to have them put myself in the Hall of Fame back in 1981, and I think that was a thrill that my whole family got when we got reception of being a Hall of Famer.
And what does it mean, like, to you to carry on the game to the younger people, to the other Hall of Famers? I mean,
well, the Hall of Fame, from many areas, you know so many people from 80, 90 years back that that are enthralled at being in the Hall of Fame, because the Tennis Hall of Fame is a unique location for everybody, and I think all the players of today that are respected and are put into the Hall of Fame is amazing.
Why does it matter to you that, or why should it matter to everybody that the Hall of Fame, their work to preserve and promote tennis history?
I think having Todd Martin, now the chairman of the Hall of Fame, is out trying to expose it to the world of tennis. And I think it's, it's almost a secret what the whole Hall of Fame is. And I think that's why, we're trying to expose the fact that all these country towns should see and know about the Tennis Hall of Fame.
That's great. I'm going to give you a name. You tell me a memory or what you think of this person. Pete Sampras.
Yeah, Pete Sampras was an unbelievable great champion. I saw him play, many matches at Wimbledon, and he's always been a crowd pleaser.
Roger Federer.
Yeah, Roger is a new breed with somewhat of a new racket. His ability to play the game, in all the various countries around the world, and his ability to play matches under pressure at all types of situations. And I think that's the one thing that Roger is separated from the rest of the world. And I think, to me, he's the #1 player in the world.
And what does it mean to you that they started the Laver Cup?
Yeah, I was thrilled that I think Roger Federer was involved in having my name put onto the Laver Cup. But I'm thrilled that we were successful in Prague, we're successful in Chicago, and I think the players that competed in it, I think were all totally involved. And I think that, to me, is success, because, with 18,000 people nightly in Chicago, it was just so tense, and the interest in every part of it was great.
Spectacular. Do you have a favorite Billie Jean King story?
Yeah, Billie Jean King was always, a great champion, played in many tournaments. We had a four-man or six-man group, 4 ladies in a group, so we played some mixed doubles. But that was, a great feeling that she brought open tennis to the ladies and prize money structure.
Great. And I forgot to ask you, Pete Sampras told me the story yesterday that he met you and you played with him when he was 11 years old.
I do remember him telling me. Yeah. Palisades somewhere, or?
Yeah, and then you came out and hit balls with him. You might not remember, but what does that mean to you, like, that, spending time hitting balls with some young kid, and he's your hero, and he grows up to be one of the greatest of all time as well?
Yeah, no, it's a great feeling to hit with a lot of the kids that are eager to play and learn the game. And, and if we impart a little bit of encouragement to the juniors on the court, I think we're very happy to do it. And just if it happened to be, one of Pete's sons, that was even more of a thrill that we could be doing that for each other.
Well, what's that like, knowing you were his hero growing up? I mean, that's got to be pretty special.
Yeah, no, I think it's nice to, you have heroes. I certainly had them as a kid growing up, and maybe not in the exact sport that you play in, but if you're a cricketer, I knew a lot of players in there that were great champions. And so the same thing happens on a tennis court. And if you're able to, as you improve bit by bit, your goals, lofty goals sometimes, but to know that I was one of them that brought someone like Pete Sampras to the top, it's a glowing thing in my life.